In today's video, we're going to be talking about making simple, basic joints, butt joints, rebate joints, joints that can be made by people with limited amount of tools and limited amount of woodworking experience. Ideally, you'll have some sort of saw, perhaps a miter saw, that you can set up to cut accurately 90-degree cuts. But if you don't have a miter saw, you can still get by. Perhaps you've got a circular saw. In this case, the circular saw that has been used to cut the corner off my steel vise and has a pretty blunt blade. We'll attempt to do it. Now, the timber should be straight, square, and I've made up a wooden right angle square to cut parallel straight lines. I want to make a 200mm long end piece, and I have to allow 38mm to cover the width of that guide. So 280 got it set so that after allowing for the width of the guide, I can cut a 200mm long end piece. Length is correct. And boy, gee, that cut's not bad. Pretty close to perfect. Now, butt joints are basically joints where you get two pieces together. You can clamp it in place and glue it. Drill holes. I like to pre-drill the screw holes with a countersinking drill, and then screw them together. We've already made up a hive using butt joints. That's what they look like. I've used a bit of pen just to mark so you can see where the joints are. Use your square, once again, to make sure that it is square in all dimensions. So that's a super. I've made two supers. One I have glued to the base a board and a cross cleat to brace it and make it exceptionally strong. If you wanted it split, you can make splitting plates out of plywood, or you can get them made out of perspex, etc. You can have root supports if you like them like that. Or if you're one of those people that don't want to know anything about splitting because you think induction is the only way to go, or you don't have to put anything in there. Now, there are other joints that you can use. You can step up and be a bit fancy. Here I've got a pre-made super that has two types of rebate joints. Common rebate joint at the top and a double rebate joint at the bottom. I think the double rebate is marginally stronger. You can put fastenings, in this case a galvanised twist shank decking nail, in on that side as well as that side. That's how I used to make them before I started making them with finger joints. But they are a strong joint when properly made, when you use your square to make sure all components are square. Now if you just put a flat piece of board on top, it will invariably warp because timber has radial rings and they will in time want to straighten those rings out. In other words, it will warp and that board will curl up. If you hold it together with a clip, it will curl up. So people tend to screw them down. I like to make my honey supers, and here's a super that's been made with butt joints. Make them perfectly flat. Make these components perfectly flat, and you can do that quite simply by gluing sandpaper, in this instance 80 grit sandpaper, to a nice flat board which I've screwed to the bench so it doesn't move around. This board will do what that big sander will do, except that a bit more elbow grease and a bit more time and perseverance is required. But you can make all of your joints, surfaces that come together, perfectly flat. And I've made the rim for that honey super, once again, perfectly flat. I've got a perfectly flat piece of timber which I have clamped the rim down to. I've glued it, clamped it down, and then drilled those screws through the rim and down into the meat of the top of the super. I've created a concealed fastening. Now, you can make them just simple box joints like that. You can make them a little bit more complicated if you have a compound miter saw. You can cut those other rebate joints, but they're not really necessary. There are a lot of hives made with butt joints. They are strong, but if you really want them really strong, you can make them finger jointed, as we'll be demonstrating in the next video. There's no need to make a hive as strong as this, but when you can do that repeatedly to a hive joint, then you've arrived at something that is really strong. Once again, that's a bit of an overkill, but I'm a show off and I can't help myself. Now you've made a really attractive square flush hive that you can be proud of. Now the next thing is to keep it so paint it and preserve it so it will stay like that for years to come. Don't be sucked into buying these paints that they say have got inbuilt primer and undercoat in it. They aren't nearly as good as a properly made, primed and sealed hive. When I make my finger jointed hives, I put a clear lacquer finish on them because I like to show off the joints. But no matter how much I want to show off those joints, I have a hive that like unpainted timber will get hotter in the summer heat waves than a hive that has been well painted in a good light coloured, preferably white paint. Now, the first thing to do when you're painting a hive is to prime it and seal it properly, and this is the stuff that I use, and I highly recommend it. It sucks into the timber, it seals the timber beautifully. It will take an acrylic paint on top of it, or it will take an oil-based paint. But get the timber to suck it up, and then give it, say, 3 coats of good quality white paint, and you have a hive that not only looks good, but will look good for years to come, and you won't get rot in it. Now, I developed in later years a spring clip system for holding hives together, but in the early days when I was making these hives, it was common practice for people to cut out big rubber bands from truck tubes, 30mm wide bands, and stretch them around the entire box to hold them together. They eventually perished and broke, but they held it together. And I could say that to people that if they came across a box that had stainless steel spring clips holding them together, then they would be a Doug Irvine made hive. But I can't say that anymore because the spring clips have become quite popular, and you see a lot of them nowadays. If you want to know whether the hive was made as a Doug Irvine hive, you've got to basically look at the bottom of them to see the fire end. In our next video, we're going to step it up a notch, and I'm going to show you how I make my hives with finger joints. They don't have to be finger jointed. It's a bit of an extravagance. I make them that way because I can, and I'm vain enough to appreciate the comments that people make about them.